So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to give an introduction into one of the biggest topics we have in also this conference, which is on grid integration of distributed generation. So the major background here is that since decades we have gained a lot of experiences in Germany, and I'm happy to share some of those experiences and give a bit of a systematic approach of grid integration, because it's a topic that is widely interpreted what it actually is. And also our institute is mainly working only on grid integration, but of course doing diverse different issues. So just a little glimpse in the situation we have in Germany. So if we look at the share of renewable energies in the power system, we are at the moment of around 40%, and some regions, federal states, are already above 100% of penetration compared to so the energy from renewable energies compared to the power flows, to the load demand. We have also, this is part of the decarbonization of the power system. The other part, which is more the decentralization, is that about 60 gigawatts of renewable energies are installed in the low and medium voltage grids. So the power production of the future mainly happens in the distribution system. And resulting from that, there's also a lot of grid reinforcement in the distribution grid to provide the platform for power delivery. The third point that is interesting to see is that if we consider the variable renewable energies in the system, where we have in total more than 100 gigawatt installed, that the share on the demand, so physically in 15 minutes resolution over the days, so time series considered, we have a fluctuation between 0 and 100% actually. So there is within few hours, and this means we have to care for the ramping and for the changes in the system, so the variability and therefore the flexibility and the reaction time, of course, needs to be much higher. So different scenarios predict that we might see more than about 400 gigawatt of installed capacity in 2050 to reach about 100% in the full energy system. And also, which is quite normal, is that we experience reverse power flow to the superior grid level. So that means we have a really bidirectional power flows on a daily basis. So what I'd like to give you as a little systematic approach into that, on the one hand, I would like to structure the smart grid integration on the one hand. On the other hand, I'd like to give you a little glimpse into a phase model approach. So what is the roadmap of integration of distributed generation? So if we approach that more systematically, what is integration? Then one part is on supporting the frequency stability. Another part is on support of voltage stability. One aspect is going on guaranteeing system security. And the other point, of course, is in the energy balance to match supply and demand, which is especially in the distribution grid interesting to compensate power flows so they are not necessarily transferred throughout all vertical grid levels. So on frequency stability, you might have already heard about this issue about 50.2 hertz. So in previous times, there was a fixed frequency where low voltage PV systems had to be disconnected within 200 milliseconds. So this was a danger for system stability. And so one of the first changes that have been implemented in 2011 was to have a dynamic reduction of power injection due to in case a certain frequency is exceeded. So there was even a retrofit necessary. So this was quite costly. And if it is thought about from the very beginning, we avoid retrofitting of existing systems. So this is one of the points. The other is that it's now going one step further, which means that the latest updates of grid codes require DGs on all voltage levels, as well as controllable loads and storage and EV feed in to be able to provide under and over frequency sensitive mode, so that even in under frequency situation there could be an increase of power. So in Europe, Ireland, for example, was one of the first who implemented such a scheme. So in critical grid situations, to throttle the power production of DGs in order to, or wind farms especially, in order to be able to provide positive power reserves. Another aspect here is the congestion management. Congestion management appears if the grid extension is not fast enough compared to the deployment of renewable energies. So that means there are bottlenecks in the power system infrastructure, and in order to limit current flows through the lines, there is a need for doing curtailment, and we have seen a steep rise over the last years. It's now more or less stable over the last years already, but this means that we have, depending on the year, about 500 million to 1 billion euro of costs for repayment of renewable energy operators because they had to be curtailed down. So it's about 3% of the energy actually. One further improvement came up in 2017, where this was also not only in critical grid situations, security, this was also implemented for the planning approach. So that means we are at the moment running projects on this topic, how to use in planning and in operational planning the flexibility to be able to reduce the power feed-in of renewable energies in a limited amount of 3% within 1 year. So this comes as a possibility to reduce system costs in total while using flexibilities, controllabilities in the power system. So summarizing on that, so we have already seen a lot of increase in DER penetration, but it's just the starting point actually. So we still have a long way to go and hundreds of gigawatts of additional installation. So this is not yet stopped. And we also see now the changes in other sectors like transport sector, electromobility. So there will be a lot of changes in the full system transformation that is now upcoming, including storage requirements and so on. So this is one of the big issues to be looked at actually. And so one of the results and experiences and the recommendations there is to start early with an harmonization of DG integration with regard to frequency stability, also to allow voltage stability control for reduction of grid reinforcements, to start early with standardized control and communication interfaces in order that the DGs can be accessed by the control centers, and to increase local consumption and reduce peaks, so local consumption of power generated locally at site, and thereby also leveling on different energy balance levels the peaks. So to use flexibility where it is needed from different sources, this is one of the challenges to balance out the full system. I'd like to give you some glances into the phase model approach. So if we look at the system transformation and look at distributed generation is defined as generation in the distribution system. There we have a lot of buzzwords that are going on in terms of what is the future DISCOM, DSO, and so on. So there are grid modernization, smart grid, bidirectional grids, active distribution system. So it's mainly the change from the network operator to the system operator, including all these different types of aspects. And if you want to classify actually this integration aspects, we can look at 4 different categories. For example, DG integration with regard to system stability and operation. We have DG integration with regard to planning, so how to plan for this integration. Customer integration as providing additional flexibility sources, and microgrid structures as one approach that is applied with regard to increasing reliability and resiliency. So what is coming in parallel to this structure of grid integration? We also see mainly 4 mega trends that are existing. So one is decarbonization. So we want to come to a sustainable renewable energy system. The other mega trend is decentralization. So that means it's going to the distribution system. Digitalization. Here it's a lot about data management, data exchange, energy data spaces. It's about information technology. It's about communication networks. So the system becomes dependent in case of digitalization also on communication networks and automation. And autarky is in the sense of being more flexible to have your own power generation, to be your own power producer. So this is actually an important aspect to follow on that. And I applied to these different issues phase models, so looking at 3 different phases. And I will look at some of the slides. So in the proceedings or in the conference lookout, you will have the possibility to look at the different phase models actually. So here now a glance on the system stability issue. And the system stability issue, the first important part is to guarantee system stability with grid codes. So there is some format issue here, so you can't see it. I read it for you. So we have the plant readiness. So that means at the early beginning, if you deploy DG, you need to be careful really to have grid codes implemented, because otherwise you might need to change behavior of the plants. And so this needs to be defined from the very beginning, even if it's not yet used, because in the next phase, also the DSOs need to get a readiness to control DG for different purposes. So their ICT and control centers need to be further upgraded and further developed. But DGs already need to have the plant readiness for that. And going one phase further, it comes if the DSO has controllability in the system, then there is also the possibility to take over as part of the system responsibility. Inverter-dominated grids, if you are at high penetration levels, require new control schemes actually. So about inertia control, voltage-controlled inverters, or grid-forming inverters. And so this is then one of the next levels to be looked at. In digitalization, it's more or less the same. So there's the plant readiness to be able to get set point values, to provide monitoring values is important, as well as the readiness of the control center in the next phase to be able to communicate. And there, in the phase when it's really used, the flexibility is used here. It's a matter of DSO-TSO coordination. It's a matter of providing ancillary services from renewable energies, aggregated by the DSO, used in the DSO area, but also towards the TSO. And one of the biggest challenges here is coming to automation. It's cybersecurity issue. So that means if your critical infrastructure becomes dependent on the ICT system, you need to be very careful that there are no intrusions possible, and so everything works fine. So with regard to the resiliency, it's a big topic to be looked at. On integration, planning, this is one aspect to go stepwise with easy solutions like voltage control, implementing new components in the next phase, and using also active power curtailment in order to have a more cost-efficient system, and in the final phase to really use active reactive power flexibilities in order to have a full system design that is designed also to use these flexibilities. In the planning, there's also consequent improvement of planning approaches. So we have the starting point with worst case planning, which is normally done. This is as soon as you come to more changes, more complex issues, you need to have new planning tools to include also operational issues, for example. And finally, it's a matter of automized planning. That is maybe still kind of steps away, because you first need to have the grid data digitalized, you need to have the planning rules and algorithms, and you have to include the operational behavior in algorithms included. So finally, the possibility would be here to have quite automized with assistive systems for grid planners, planning procedures, and, which is also getting important, to cover the uncertainty. So uncertainty containment, because we often don't know exactly what happens next, but we need to prepare installations and reinforcements also strategically for the future aspects. As I'm out of time, I will skip the areas of customer integration, where we have, I think, a lot of sessions here also with storage and EV integration. Also there, grid codes should be defined from the early beginning. And the autarky issue, which means the possibility to operate in a zero energy balance level, or even physically disconnected to the system, so to increase reliability in terms of power outages, so you have your sustained running island system, can become of interest to come to more resilient system designs that are flexible to adapt to the situations that will be quite changing throughout the time in the future. So concluding this, I would like to emphasize that the very first phase is to define the plant controlled readiness, to really set the grid codes even as we already would have a very high penetration, in order to be really prepared for this situation, because many old plants will be available then as well. Then the next phase is important to prepare also the discoms, the DSOs, in order to be able to do new planning approaches, to do new operational approaches, starting with the ICT infrastructure and so on. So this is an important next phase. And in the third phase, actually, it becomes more and more complex, so their ancillary services should also be provided by distributed generation renewable energies on all voltage levels. Storage and electrical vehicles, controllable loads need to be included to stabilize and balance the full system. And we need to think about new control systems away from synchronous generators, maybe even in very high penetration situations. And the coordination between different market actors becomes most important. And what I like to emphasize is here on automation and cybersecurity, this is becoming an important part of that. Okay, so far for giving some structural introduction into this topic. And if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end, because the organization is that we collect the questions, so write them down and ask at the end in the panel round. Okay, thanks a lot.